On Wednesday nights, after our fabulous Life Together dinners that you are all welcome to come to, there are a lot of things that happen. But one of the things that happens is I lead a discussion on the second reading for the coming Sunday. And so we have been marching through 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, sometimes referred to as the pastoral letters in the New Testament. Tradition claims that Paul wrote them, and the words this morning are somewhat familiar to us. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, right? We know that language. And scholars, though, over the centuries have looked at this and said, is there language in these pastoral letters that would suggest maybe that somebody other than Paul wrote it? And in fact, next Sunday, we're going to read from a book that most scholars strongly feel that Paul wrote, from the book of Romans. Reformation Sunday is a strange Sunday where the main reading for the day really is the second reading from Romans, where we say here, Paul writes that we are justified by grace through faith apart from works of the law. So that is next Sunday's kind of core moment in regards to the Reformation, kind of Martin Luther's eureka moment in this text, understanding that it's not what we do. And in this text, what we have today from 2 Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I am amazing and will get rewarded at the end of time. It's not really the justified by grace piece. It's the more of like showing up at the pearly gates and seeing a long line of people and scooting up the side and saying, I've been looking at the folks here, but St. Peter, I'm sure you want to see my resume first, is kind of the vibe we're getting from this, and definitely is a part of the discussion related to the gospel reading itself, as we got in the children's sermon, of course, the two characters in the parable there. We hear this image of putting ourselves first or not. Now, I want to say that I feel like this text is a good one for us here in Silicon Valley. We have a lot of rock stars. We have a lot of people with strong resumes, a lot of people that are used to applying for jobs and getting into schools, all kinds of things. I have fought the good fight. And that's the way our society works in many ways. And we are in one of those spots where that's sharpened to a fine point, right? This sense of what have I done? I. And that's not the text that we have for today. But I also want to mention another thing that is not the text that we have for today. I'm always interested sometimes in the parables at parts of the story that could have been but are not. I find those sometimes to be interesting. We have in this story two men who are going about their religious obligation. So hear that. There is no third character who is laying in bed and saying, you know, I'm so fabulous, I don't think I even need to go to the temple. That character doesn't exist. The two characters that we have are both getting up that morning and getting ready to head to the temple to observe their religious faith. One is saying, God is so lucky that I'm up early today. I know that God can't wait until I get there. And the other one is, I've got a lot to talk to God about because, man, it's been a week and I need some mercy because it's not been good, right? But they are both seeking to do their religious duty. They show up. We have the image of the two people there. We have the Pharisee, a local religious leader, So that kind of adds an extra point to the part of the story. And then we have a tax collector. Now, I know there have probably been vast periods of time in history where tax collectors have been popular heroes, but generally speaking, there aren't large groups of, fans for tax collectors, not a thing. In Jesus' day, tax collectors were Jewish people who collaborated with the Romans. Not very popular as they were occupying that place. The Romans might say, we'd like to get $100 million in taxes from Palo Alto. And one of the tax collectors goes in and says, how about 125 million? And then raises 150 million, and the Romans still get their 125 million, right? So that kind of neighbor is the one in this story. So we have these curious characters in this sense of things, this idea that our lives of faith are about building a resume like any other part of our lives, that I will justify myself. God is going to be so lucky to have me, as over and against the story that we have here of the tax collector. Now, there's a word in this text that I think is the one that I would like us to sit with for this week. It's a common word in English. It is not a religious word in particular. Humility. Humility. It's a word that we don't use all that much, is it? It's a word that we struggle with. In fact, if you interview for a job and leave and they're sitting around the conference table, how often does it come up? These were two great candidates, but this one showed more humility. Let's hire them. Is that the sense of kind of how our society works? It's difficult because there's the way in which things work, and then there's the way in which we're called to be as people of faith. And I think, again, that we're in kind of a unique location to kind of wrestle with this, because a lot of the way the world works is something that we in particular have been good at in general. And so I think our ears ought to be perhaps a bit more open to hearing this text. This idea that in creation there is the Creator and we the creatures. The tax collector is very mindful of his place relative to God. And I think that's one of the things that is a real spiritual discipline and something for us to wrestle with. As we think of this text in this week, I want you to put it up against next Sunday's second reading when we talk about grace. That we are not capable of getting there on our own. But it is that God came to us as one of us that gives us hope and mercy. And today's text clearly shows us how we are called to move through this life in humility, in graciousness and mercy towards others. Amen.